Justin Grifford, man, thanks so much for joining us today on the Rev Rx Podcast, man. What a privilege it is to have you here on the show. I've had this earmarked for quite a while, and I'm so excited to jump in with you today.
Thank you, Chad. I'm just thrilled to be here, and let's get to it.
Yeah. I'd love for you to just let our listeners know a little bit more about you so they can get to know you. How did you get to be who you are today? I'd love to unpack your book a little bit later, but before that, who's Justin Grifford?
So I'm a husband, I'm a father, and I'm a pastor. I've been married for about 16 years, almost 16 years. I've got 3 kids. They are 14, 10, and 4. And I've been a pastor, been in ministry for about as long as I've been married, about 16 years. I've served as an associate pastor. I've served as a youth pastor for about 10 of those years. I've been a senior pastor for about 2 years now and have lived originally from Arkansas, lived in Missouri for a little while, actually lived in South Korea for about a year, but then been doing ministry in Alabama and now in Mississippi.
Awesome. And, you've got a way with words. That's one of the things I've noticed about you. I think pastors need to. You have to be able to take ancient literature and be able to explain it in ways people can understand. But some are more gifted than others, and you're very gifted at that. So I just want to give you that compliment off the bat.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
And so what drew me to you was your book that's called Starting Poorly. First of all, the title's catchy. I like that.
Thank you.
But I resonated with it because, man, this journey that I've been on, and for all of my listeners here, I've been doing this a little over a year now. This podcasting journey for me was about starting poorly. I'm a perfectionist at heart. And if I'm going to release something, especially if I'm going to put my name and my face on things like the podcast, and I'm going to put it out there for the world to see, man, it needs to be perfect before I do it. And that's my nature. That's how I want to be. But, I got a nudge from God to start this podcast, and it had to just start poorly. That was the first time in my life I'd really taken that leap of faith and said, you know what, it's okay if it doesn't have to be perfect, because if I wait for it to be perfect, I'll be waiting for years and I may not ever do it. And so I was drawn to that, and then working my way through it. You work through the different stages of all of this, but what was really your intent when you came out with this book? What was it that led you to that? What made you want to write this book about starting poorly? Was it personal experience, or I've read the book, so I know, but can you tell our listeners a little bit about?
So the build up to all of this is whenever I became a father, I realized how much free time I used to have. And I was serving as an associate pastor at the time. I was a husband and a new father. And I found that the growth within me just wasn't happening. Like, it wasn't happening by accident. I was not being the father I was made to be, the husband I was made to be, the pastor I was made to be. And so I realized that my time is no longer my own. And so if I'm going to be the man that God's called me to be, the husband, the father, I need to steward my time better. And so that led me to this journey of developing habits and goals and attainable things that I can do along the way. And so that being part of my life the last 12 years or so, it led me to the end of 2023, the beginning of 2024. And if you're really into goals, you like the end of one year and the beginning of the next, because you can evaluate, okay, how well did I do? How many books did I read? How many miles did I run? And what can I launch into going into the new year? And so that was me at the transition to 2024. There were books I wanted to read, miles I wanted to run, workouts I wanted to do. I wanted to practice writing more, all of these different things. And so as January 1st hit the calendar, I get COVID, I get the flu, I pull my hamstring, I have an infection that kind of lingers on throughout the rest of the year. And so any workout that I'm doing is a walk to the bathroom and back. Once you do that with the flu, you're exhausted. And I remember watching my kids play outside, sitting on the edge of my bed thinking, man, I am starting the year very poorly.
Mm-hmm.
And it got me thinking, it just took me down this road of thoughts of, man, everything in life that we do, we start poorly. Whether it's tying our shoes, it's potty training, it's swinging a golf club for the first time, it's algebra, starting a job on the first day. We all start poorly, and over time, we get better. But when it comes to the things that we've always wanted to do, the dreams, the goals, the habits that we want to develop, like you said, we feel like it has to be perfect. We feel like
Mm-hmm.
we have to have the perfect plan. Everything needs to be in place. And if one thing goes wrong, if we miss one day of the diet, one meal on the diet, let's throw it all away. If we miss one workout, let's throw it all away. It's not worth doing. And that sounds crazy, because if we treated our kids that way, we make one mistake with our kids, well, we gotta give them up for adoption.
Yeah.
That's so the start poorly theme became sort of a soundtrack for me. And honestly, it's a version of God's grace. It's a version of grace to us to do and to pursue the things that we've always wanted to do.
That's so good. And there's a lot to unpack there. Let me start off by saying, yeah, marriage and parenting are two of the most sanctifying institutions there are.
Amen.
You think you're selfish, get married. Or, I'm
Mm-hmm.
sorry, you think you're selfless,
Right.
get married. You think that you've got things together, have kids. Man, they show you just how imperfect you are. And I'm convinced that's just part of God's grace for us. And when we get into those moments and we think about like our kids learning to tie their shoes, or we think about any task that they learn, yeah, they start poorly. I've got two kids. I've got three kids too. Mine are a little younger than yours. They're 3, 5, and 8.
Okay.
And
Well,
my older two are just starting in ball. So we're getting involved with baseball. We've tried soccer, but they don't like to run, so that wasn't for them. And or they didn't when they were that age. But now they're into baseball. And if I thought about the same thing and going through your book, if we use the same logic with them as we do with ourselves, like, hey buddy, you can't hit the baseball first time. You just need to hang it up. You need to quit. You're just not good at this, and you need to wait until you're perfect to start playing. That makes
yeah.
no sense, right?
Right. And I think it's because we live in such an instant culture. And I'm sure as a pharmacist, you get it too, that people, rather than changing their diet or changing their lifestyle, just give me a pill and make all this go away. And even for kids, video games, you can put Madden or college football in the game, and you can be the best quarterback in the nation. It just doesn't happen like that in real life. And so I try to tell my kids, I tried to teach them. I took them to the tennis courts for the first time just a couple of weeks ago. And on the way there, I told them the words, okay, guys, we're going to start poorly. You're not going to be able to hit the ball soundly every time. Just, this is a learning experience.
And it's so important to come alongside them and really help them set realistic expectations, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
I think that's part of our job as parents, is that, yeah, in an instant culture that we live in, being able to show them that, not everything's this way. As a matter of fact, the things that really matter aren't that way. The things that are worthwhile take time. And,
The hard things in life are worth doing.
yeah, yeah. And so, yeah, I've been thinking about that lately with the ball illustration, and I'm like, man, but we're so hard on ourselves, and there is this expectation that things need to be, like you said, perfect. But starting poorly, there's a lot of reward in that. What have you found that really limits us from this expectation of, okay, if I'm going to start, it's got to go great? Because you mentioned everybody around January 1st, they set all these resolutions, me included. There's nothing wrong with that.
Sure. Yeah.
But we want to be our best self. We're trying to set ourselves up. This is going to be my year. And so I'm 41. When I turned 40, I said, you know what? I'm going to be the healthiest I've ever been when I turn 40. Well, that whole, like, if you want to hear God laugh, tell him your plans. That wasn't what God had in mind for me when I turned 40. When I turned 40, I had some issues pop up, and long story short, ended up having to have it was 4 surgeries over 18 months, and
Wow.
kept me out of, like, I had the same goals as what you were mentioning, wanted to run all the miles, wanted to do all the workouts, wanted to be healthy, and I found myself in this condition to where I couldn't do anything that I wanted to do. All those things I'd set up for myself, it seemed like they were impossible now. And so the temptation there is to say, forget it all. Is that what you found in your studies, in your experience? Is that there is this tendency, if it can't be perfect, it's just not worth doing?
I think so. Yeah, I think that there's different types of fear. Like when we think of fear, we think of, oh, we're just afraid. And in the book, I kind of paint the picture of, do you remember the old indoor malls? I don't think we see them as much anymore, but they had the food courts, and you had the Sabaro's Pizza next to the 5 Chinese restaurants where you can get samples, which I
Right,
love.
right.
I would
Yeah,
go there now.
miss those days.
Yeah, miss those days. And so I think that fear is almost like that food court, that there's different fear vendors, that there's a fear of perfectionism. There's a fear, you can go over here, there's a fear of not being good enough. Go over here, there's a fear of, oh, you're just a copycat of somebody else. You're an imposter. So fear kind of manifests itself in all these different places. And even as you're making progress on your goal, on your dream, fear will tell you a different story along the way.
Yeah. And it comes down to, is it good enough? How much is good enough? Or at least it has for me.
Mm-hmm.
In the podcasting journey, when I first started this, you see Joe Rogan, you see all these people, and man, everything's so polished. Everything's so great. And there's a lot of limiting beliefs, I think, that pop up whenever we're starting something new, which also holds us back. Part of that whole process of starting poorly. But along the lines, you just have to be able to accept that there are limitations in everything that you do. But starting is the most important step. Can you talk about that? Just actually starting as being the biggest thing there. Maybe the biggest mistake we make is not in the mistakes we make, but it's in not starting anything because we're scared we're going to make mistakes.
Yeah, I think whenever we start, we actually get a taste, because we're talking about potential. There's some studies done on potential. I think the numbers are like 50% of all people feel like, actually it's larger than that. I think it's like 70% of all people feel like they aren't living up to their potential, that there's just a bunch of people walking around just with this gap inside of them.
Right.
And
Yeah.
imagine the toll that takes on them, on their bodies, on their thoughts, and how much healthier they would be if they were living into that. And so
Hmm.
I think whenever you start, you actually begin to taste that dream. You actually begin to taste what it would be like to do that thing, to play the guitar, to write a book, to train for a marathon. And when you start, you actually begin to put into motion that thing that you've always wanted to do. And I think a little bit of planning is necessary. A lot of planning isn't vital, because as soon as you start, you realize that that your plans change, that you needed
Hmm.
to make that plan in pencil rather than in pen. And you got to be able to pivot when you do start, because I'm sure that you had some preconceived notions about
Mm.
podcasting.
Yep.
What changed for you? What mindset changed for you once you chose to start?
Well, it was just realizing that, something's better than nothing. Because if I just sit around waiting until I'm ready, I'll never be ready.
Yeah.
But you know what? Something's better than nothing, and everyone has to start somewhere. Was kind of my mantra. Joe Rogan didn't start as Joe Rogan. He started. He didn't start as what he is now. He started, you know, like the rest of us start.
And can you
People
imagine
have different.
hosting for 3 hours a day? Can you,
No,
like, I can't imagine doing that.
but how much better you'd be.
Sure. That's
You
true.
know,
That's true.
and I think back. I think back to my first few episodes, and I apologize to my listeners for some of those because the audio wasn't great, the video wasn't great, the conversations may not have even been all that good.
Right. Yeah.
But I think the grace of God shined through it because I was faithful and I was obedient in what He nudged me to do. And that's the thing too. From a faith standpoint, when we're at our weakest, that's when He's the strongest. And so if I'm always leaning into, I've got to be perfect, well, where do we need God? Where does He need to come into our life? At some point we need to be able to say, all right, if He's calling me to this, He's going to equip me for it. That doesn't mean immediately, but it means I'm going to grow into it. And so at what point do I trust Him to be able to make up for that gap, if that
Yeah.
makes sense?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, and I wonder sometimes if we would probably never admit to this, but we think, okay, this is something that I want to do. This is a dream that I have. And so it's kind of personal, and maybe it's a little selfish, and God doesn't really have anything to do with it because it's not anything super spiritual, or it's not any pursuit of Him. But in reality, I believe that if it, as His children, if it's something that we're interested in doing, and it's not opposed to Him, then I think if we care, He cares. And so if this is something that we want to do, it's most certainly something that we need to allow Him into. Because if you look at the Christian life, if you look at what Jesus has called us to be like Him, and so you want to talk about starting poorly and never reaching perfection in this life. I mean, the Christian life is a lifetime of starting poorly and
Hmm.
struggling and striving to become more and more like Jesus. D.A. Carson has a great quote. He says that no one stumbles into holiness, and it's by grace-driven effort that we are sanctified, that we become holy. And so it's just all
It's good.
about that effort and trying. And so if that's the case with the Christian life, it's most certainly the case with learning how to play the guitar, with writing a book, with taking singing lessons, or whatever the case may be, starting a blog, starting a podcast.
Yeah. And, in your book, you describe these phases that we go through. And I believe is there five or six?
5 phases.
Yeah. Can you kind of give us an elevator pitch version of those, and just kind of maybe we can walk through those and have a conversation about it?
Yeah, so I think that every phase exists, or every dream, every goal, every habit exists in these 5 phases. And each one in the book I highlight, there's pros to that phase, there's cons, and there's box jumps. Whenever I was in high school, we had to do these box jump exercises, and I hated them, but you couldn't move on until you cleared the box jumps. And so I identify some box jumps and ways to get over those in each phase. And so the first phase is the dream phase. And man, the dream phase, it's like we're kids again. It's like we were in elementary school. I want to be an astronaut. I want to be a baseball player. And it's amazing, the dream phase, because you can do anything, you can be anything, and you can live in this wonderland as long as you want to. But that's also the con, is that some people stay in the dream phase their entire life and they never do anything about it. And so the hurdle there in trying to figure out how do we move on to the actual planning phase is feel like people are busy. Everybody's busy. The single man's busy. The married mom is busy. Everybody's busy. But if you can just designate about 15 minutes to just begin writing down that thing, what it is you want to do, what it is you want to accomplish, you can start taking a step to the plan phase. And the plan phase is just that. It is creating a simple plan. Okay, when am I going to do this? How much time am I going to dedicate to it a day? When am I going to start? Just creating just a couple simple little steps will make a huge difference. And the box jump there, and you've already spoken to it, is perfection. Getting the perfect plan. People will get stuck in the plan phase for a long time if they're waiting for the perfect plan. And so the box jump, the way to clear that basically is just to clear that simple plan. Answer 3 questions. When will I start? What do I need to start? And how long do I work on it per day? Or what's the frequency of it? And so those are the first 2 phases. The third phase is the start phase, and we've already talked about that. The pro there is that you finally are putting, it's where the rubber meets the road. You're finally putting that into practice. The con there is that you're about to find out if you really have what it takes. And from there, you move on to the grind phase. And there is no box jump from start to grind. The grind phase will find you. You will discover how hard this is.
Yeah.
This is, to put a biblical illustration to it, this is the people wandering through the wilderness. This is God's people being sanctified. This is the long journey, and knowing that this is developing you. This is that developed their character. It's developing your perseverance, and you're finding out what you're made of. And then the final phase, if you continue through that, if you just keep working, because the temptation in the grind phase is doubt. That can I do this? Can I finish this? The final phase is the finish phase. And in the finish phase, it's just that. You finally finish the book. You finally are a consistent podcast host. You finally get to run the marathon. And so that's obviously its own pro, but the con and the fear with the finish phase is, okay, now that I've accomplished this, what's next? People often find so much of their identity in a certain goal and a certain dream.
Right.
What if I paint the paintings? What if I sell my book? But what if no one likes it? What if no one likes the work that I do? What if I'm just a laughing stock because of this? I'm the butt of every joke. There's even a fear when we finish the goal. Yeah. And so those are the 5 phases that all of these find themselves in at one point. And at different times we can get hung up in different phases.
Yeah, and that's a really good overview of just really the whole process of, setting a goal, going after your goal, and finishing your goal. And I love how you address the finishing aspect. Can we talk about that just a minute?
Yeah, sure.
Because it's we think, all right, I'm done, and when I finish, everything's going to be fantastic, and there is that sense of accomplishment at the end. But you're right. There's so many doubts there. There's so many limiting beliefs there. And I just love to dig deeper there a little bit too, because we can start and we can finish something, but it doesn't end at the finish, does it? And so, going on past the finishing, and we're never really done with this race if we want to use the Christian illustration too. The whole idea of we start poorly every day. We're never going to achieve flawlessness and perfection on this side of heaven. That's glorification waiting to happen on the other side. But it's the grind that we seem to be stuck in. But yet there are little finishes along the way, and those are times where we can celebrate. You finished your book. There's a celebration there. I've had milestones along my journey. I had the 10th episode come out just recently. And so I'm like, all right, yay. But then doubt creeps in, doesn't it? And I'm convinced a lot of times that's just it is either things in our past that kind of pop up. I'm not good enough. No one wants to hear my voice. That kind of thing. Sometimes it's a trick of the enemy, who's the author of discouragement a lot of times. But what have you found is that biggest challenge? Once we do, all right, we set out, we grind, we end up going through the finishing process, but sometimes it's not what we think it's going to be.
Yeah, you touch on it a little bit. There's two tips that I recommend. I have tips recommended throughout each phase, but those two tips are sell your work, ship your work. Seth Godin talks about whatever it is that you finish, share it with the world. He has this great quote: "Your work will never be good enough for everyone, but it's already good enough for someone." And
Wow.
that told me that, again, that's a perfectionistic mindset that we bring in, is that everyone has to like it. No, they don't, and they won't.
Yeah.
But what you have already done is good enough for someone, and finding your audience is what's so important. But you talking about your 50th episode, that's one of the tips, is that make a memory, post a picture of it, celebrate it. My wife was really sweet in doing this in the middle of my book launch. There's been so much time and energy and sure, a little bit of neglect of my own family and working in this, just because it's demanded so much of me. But my wife created my own little launch party and launch backdrop. I didn't have an official launch party anywhere, but
That's
she
cool.
created one for me in our kitchen. Her doing that, we have pictures of it, and she helped me celebrate that. She helped me celebrate and almost memorialize it. And so I think whenever we have these wins along the way, it is important to celebrate. It is important to communicate that this is my 50th podcast, that this is the launch of this thing. This is a win that we have, because you're right. In the long marathon that is the Christian life, we have to be able to define what's a win, and how we can celebrate those are really important along the way.
They kind of become our Ebenezer moments, don't they?
Yes.
Our moments of remembrance where we realize God's faithfulness to us. And, and that's kind of what that reminds me of, is in this Christian journey that we have, or just this journey called life. It's not separate. If you're a believer, it's not a separate thing. It's just part of you. But in this journey called life, there are seasons, and God's faithfulness proves true in every season, but in so many different ways. And so, you go through those seasons of, all right, well, here's what I'm facing now, and I'm gonna push through, and I'm gonna become whoever it is God tells me I need to become. And I'm gonna finish it, and God was faithful to me. And then now I've got to pivot. You mentioned the art of the pivot. That's been the name of the game for me, I feel like, the last 2 years. Write everything in pencil and learn to pivot. But then we pivot, and rarely is life ever just a steady climb. It's hills and it's valleys and it's mountains and it's low moments. We go through those and we grind some more. We dream, we grind, we finish, and then we pivot again. And so creating those little moments of celebration is, to me, remembrance of how far we've come with God's help. At 25 episodes, I had a little mini celebration. At 50, I had one. I don't plan on quitting this anytime soon. Maybe I'll have 100. Keep on going, 1,000, who knows? But
yeah.
And each step of the way, hopefully we get better. But each step of the way, we were better than we were before. And that's a lot of how I see the Christian life in walking with God, because there is not flawlessness or perfection on this side, but it's, can I be more Christ-like today than I was yesterday? Can I be more Christ-like tomorrow than I was today? And I think that kind of helps us think through that, and have those little moments. But man, that's so good. You just you nailed like the human experience in like 10 minutes. So
Well, and you touched on something too, like you can measure how many books you sell, you can measure how many podcasts you have, like those are measurables. It's really hard to measure sanctification. I've long dreamed, and you as a pastor understand this, I've long dreamed of there being like this virtual meter over everyone's head to let me know if they're getting it or not, if it's red, if it's green. And I would love it if that exists,
that'd
but
be awesome.
yeah, that would be awesome, but it doesn't.
See that meter move just a little bit as we're teaching. That'd be great.
That's right. Yes, that would do my heart such good.
Right, right. But even beyond that, it's things like, there is sanctification, but then just like maturity in general. It's hard to measure that. It's hard to measure how much more mature I am as a fill in the blank, how much better I am as a dad, for example, than I was when I first started this game.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's something that I have zero way of knowing from an objective point of view how much better I am. But you know what? That's where we have to say, all right, let's celebrate those milestones. You know what? My kid said this last week.
Mm-hmm.
And that really let me know they've been listening and they've been paying attention. And it may not look like it.
Right.
And it may not seem like it, but you know what? They did. And that shows me they get it. Or you know what? They learned how to do this. And one of the things I've learned about being a dad, and I, by no stretch perfect by any consideration, but oh, you there?
Yep, I'm here. It
Okay.
gave me the warning that my battery's getting low, but we got
Okay. Cool. One of the things I've learned about from being a dad is that you don't really know where you are in the grand scheme of things until afterwards. It's in looking back a lot of times that we realize that growth. And so, kind of my last question for you is, what's your view on kind of reflection? Because I think all along the way, we need to see the progress we've gone through, and so there's a lot of value in retrospection, a lot of value in reflecting on where did I start and then where am I now.
Yeah, that's good. I had this conversation a few years ago with somebody. They are very good at reflection. I have always been, what's the next thing?
Yeah,
And so
yeah,
I've been awful at what you're talking about. But I think whenever I allow myself to do that, and you touched on this a little bit at the beginning of the podcast, is that having a wife and having children pulls a lot of selfishness out of you. And over time, when you're drained of that, you're actually a lot more selfless person than you were at the beginning. And so, yeah, I think it's really helpful, especially with any goal or any journey that you're on, if you can document in some way. I found this really cool way of doing it for me. I've never used this before. And so this is a plug to these people, but there's something called the Hero's Journal, okay? And it's kind of these people kind of did their own research with goal setting, and they basically told almost like a role playing game story. And every page has a little caricature and picture, and you see this little character go on this journey. And as you work towards your goal, as you document what your goal is for that day or for that 90-day period, you can talk about how you're feeling, you can journal how you're feeling, and you see this character on each page go from place to place and overcome certain obstacles. And so revisiting that, something I'd never used before, was kind of a companion that I took on this little trip. And so I think that if you can do something like that, whether that's on a specific goal, whether that's on your faith journey, that's just one of those spiritual disciplines that we're better for if we can make ourselves do it.
Yeah, 100%. I've never been a believer in journaling until recent years. I'm like, oh, that's something, Dear Diary. That's
Right.
something
Yeah.
all the teenage girls do. But
Yeah. Yeah. Men don't
there,
do that, right?
yeah, there's a lot of value in that.
Mm-hmm.
Just in documenting, some of those high moments, some of those low moments, and again, it's just those ways of looking back and saying, huh, things have changed a lot over time.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think I know what you're talking about too. I'll put a link to that in the show notes as well.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
little
It's really cool.
hero journal.
You're right. I mean, I've gone back and looked at a journal entry that I made a few years ago, and something really major and frustrating was going on. And looking back, I thought, that really wasn't as big of a deal as I thought it was. Like, God has a way of pulling you out of that and making you forget it.
And that's that's a large part of life, isn't it? And in the moment, things seem like a much bigger deal than if we just get through it, look back, and we're like, not that big a deal.
Yeah. Yep.
Justin, man, this has been awesome. I could talk to you a while about this, but man, you've really added a lot of value to my life and in your writing, and excited to bring that value to my listeners as well. Can you tell us how they can connect with you and enter into your world?
Absolutely. You could go to justingrifford.com, GRIFFORD.com, and there you can subscribe to my newsletter. You can purchase my book. There's an Amazon link there, but you can also find it at Barnes & Noble, Books A Million. It's available in the Audible as well if you want me to read it to you, but it's pretty much available everywhere.
Awesome. Thank you so much, brother. Keep doing the awesome work for the kingdom, and we'll be in touch for sure. But you guys check him out, Justin Grifford. I'll put the links in the show notes, and you guys check him out. Doing great work, and man, just keep being a blessing.
All right. Thanks, Chad.